Welcome, everyone. I'm Josh Catalyst, clinical nutritionist and functional medicine practitioner. I'm really excited to be presenting today on chronic anxiety. I've worked with clients, hundreds of them, over the past 15 years, and a very common complaint that I get from them is chronic anxiety. Anxiety at a level that becomes dysfunctional, that affects the quality of life. So I'm looking forward to taking you through this, looking at what some of the root factors are, the root causes, what we can do about it most importantly, and give you some really powerful tools that you can apply right away in your life or your client's life. Let's jump right in. What will you learn? First, we're going to look at a few statistics on mental health that I'm sure is going to really surprise you. We'll look at the two pillars of mental health, what anxiety actually is, some contributing factors, and possible solutions. I say possible solutions because everyone's different. You know, with functional nutrition, it's all about personalization. So we have to figure out what works for that specific person. Let's look at some statistics to begin with here. 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental health problems. Mental illness is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Now that's a staggering piece of information. I remember when I first heard that, I was just blown away. It's something that's under the radar. It's very taboo. You know, you can't see it or feel it. You know, at least, when someone breaks their arm, you can see it. There's a cast on it, there's pain. It's pretty obvious. Or if someone's in an accident and gets physically injured. Or even if someone's dealing with something like cancer, like it's palpable. It's something you can see, at least through imaging in some way. It's something you can definitely feel, and you go through this experience. But mental illness, no matter what scan you do, you can't really see it. So it's a really interesting line of exploration when we're looking at the human body and human health. Mental illness can decrease life expectancy by 10 to 20 years. This is also a staggering statistic. A lot of what happens because someone is anxious chronically or has some other mental health issue, this groups depression and a lot of other things in there, they're going to make decisions that are going to be against life, that are going to affect their health in a negative way. 1 in 8 children are diagnosed with brain development disorders. I know that, right now, I think the statistic is, 1 in 45 kids, maybe it's even more common, are diagnosed with autism. We have kids being diagnosed left, right, and center with ADD and ADHD for various reasons, which we'll get into in a moment. And this is our future, right? These kids should be thriving. They should, be happy and healthy and have a joie de vivre. The global prevalence of dementia is 24 million. We're not covering dementia in our chat today, but it's just an interesting take on it. And the top prescription in the US is antidepressants. Can we actually make a chemical that is anti-depression, right? Can we make chemicals, can we make substances that help with anxiety or that solve anxiety? A lot of it comes from within. It comes from the decisions we make. It comes from biochemical imbalances, which we'll get into. Now, I remember when I was a kid, my parents would not let me just sit in front of the TV and watch for hours. I think we had a deal at one point that every hour that I read, I was allowed to watch 1 hour of TV. I'm not sure how long that lasted, but I was not just sitting in front of a TV for hours on end. And even when I did watch TV, you lose interest. I mean, there was just things that weren't on that you enjoyed at that time. You only had a certain amount of channels to choose from. And we all sat in front of this big black box here, this big, clunky TV in a living room. So even when we did watch TV, we often did it with family, with friends. A lot of homes only had one TV, and it was more of a social interaction, even though we were focusing on a screen. What we have found that over the years, it's become more and more of a solitary experience, up until the point now where everyone has a smartphone, right? We can access, anything. We can access videos, pictures, games, everything that we want from the phone, and it happens fast, fast, fast. Teenagers these days, you see them hanging out at the restaurant or out in public somewhere, and they're all on their phones, kind of like this picture here. We have increased the messages that are going to the brain exponentially. And that's not just from phones, but it's from media, it's from billboards, it's from the news, it's from all of the places externally that come into our nervous system. Jonathan Haidt is doing some great work in this arena. And he said that by designing a fire hose of addictive content that entered through kids' eyes and ears, and by displacing physical play and in-person socializing, these companies have rewired childhood and changed human development on an almost unimaginable scale. And of course, he's referring to the social media companies, which have kind of carte blanche on how they operate and how they access the brains of these kids. His book is titled The Anxious Generation. And what we find is that anxiety is increasing so quickly because we're moving from a play-based environment to a phone-based environment, especially in childhood. With this transition, it's something that's unprecedented. If you think back to our Paleolithic ancestors, we're just walking in the woods, hunting and gathering and spending time with family by the fire. Our biology takes thousands and thousands of years to change, but the changes of technology have happened so quickly, right? I can still, again, think back to when I was young. The power that's in a smartphone today, I think, only NASA might have had access to, or some of the strongest computers. So we're bombarding the nervous system. So how does the nervous system react to all this? Well, let's talk about the two pillars of mental health for a moment. Coming into our nervous system, we have mental, emotional, and spiritual experiences. Okay? When those come into the nervous system, they get processed in the brain. We can call it the factory of emotion. And it's translated into biochemical molecules. Everything's chemistry, right? So for example, if I see a really good friend and I give them a hug, that hug induces something called the oxytocin to be released. And oxytocin has a whole bunch of really nice effects in the body in terms of how it makes us feel. That's a biochemical effect. But this is bidirectional. We also have biochemical effects in the body that can affect our cognition and how we feel. So, for example, a blood sugar crash that's happening endogenously within our body can make us feel almost like we have anxiety. Or we often hear people use the term hangry, referring to hunger and angry all in one when they're really hungry, right? So that can also affect our cognition by that biochemical effect. So it's bidirectional. These two pillars of mental health, though, we have the mental, emotional, spiritual side of things, which is affected by many different factors. Our coping skills, how well we can handle stressful situations, right? Some people really thrive as a Marine. Some people would crumble in that high stress environment. Life experiences help to shape our brain. Guardians, who our parents were. Did we have one parent, two parents, more parents? schooling, where we went to school and what we learned in school and our social interactions in that environment, our education, the culture that we live in. Very different cultures around the world are going to have different stress responses. Are you growing up in the slums in India, or are you growing up in a first world country? Family, big part of it. Are you the only child? Are there 9 kids in your family? Do you know, how old are your siblings? Lots of factors there. Our outlook on life and different opportunities that we're presented with. And of course, this is just a short list. There's many other factors that affect our mental, emotional, spiritual side of things, but this is what shapes our brain and how we perceive the world. The other side, or the other pillar, is all of these biochemical influences that can actually affect our cognition and work upwards. Blood sugar, as I mentioned, we're going to explore that in a lot more detail. Various nutrients that are necessary. For example, we need B vitamins in order to make neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Our genes, our genetic makeup, and how that affects our biochemistry. Certain allergies can affect the way the brain works, sensitivities as well. Drugs are a big factor in that. Various chemicals like toxins, heavy metals. We know that lead affects childhood or brain development in children. It's really damaging to neurochemistry. Certain diseases affect the brain, of course, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Those would be obvious ones. And the microbiome, very strong relationship between what's going on with our bacteria in our gut and how our cognition is working. So these are the 2 pillars, and again, we can appreciate that these are bidirectional. A really interesting study that was done, not a specific study, but a book on many studies, Molecules of Emotion, was written by Candace Pert. Candace Pert did quite a lot of work in her labs, and what she discovered was that, well, let me just read you this quote for a moment. As our feelings change, this mixture of peptides travels throughout your body and your brain. And they're literally changing the chemistry of every cell in your body. So with every thought, every emotion, every perception that comes into our nervous system, we actually have a corresponding set, a corresponding cocktail of chemicals that are created within our brain, within our nervous system, within our body, that then go and influence the expression of every cell in the body. Isn't that interesting? And if we take that a step further, what we call positive emotions, like joy, happiness, love, gratitude, they create chemicals that restore the health to cells, that help with the anabolic process. And the opposite, negative emotions like fear, anger, these do the opposite, and they break down the cells of our body. And that's why we see that there's really strong connections between emotions, even past life experiences, and even certain illnesses. Dr. Gabor Mate writes in detail and lectures in detail on this. He's a medical doctor who's done a lot of work with those people with addictions, and he's made a lot of connections between early childhood, adolescence, and what types of illnesses people are afflicted with later in life. Super interesting stuff. So let's dive into our discussion in anxiety. What is anxiety? Now, before we really get into the symptoms of anxiety, I think it's something we've all experienced. We have to experience it. It's one of the ways our body, our brain, our nervous system can assess if there's a danger or not. We need to experience anxiety. And like with anything in functional nutrition, everything in the body that results in dysfunction is something moving too fast, too slow, or out of order. Or there's too much, too little. This is what every dysfunction is based on. So too little anxiety is actually a problem. There's people with damage to their brain regions like the amygdala, And these people, they've done case studies on them, they often find themselves in very risky situations without them even knowing, because they don't have like the danger signal in their brain. And then the opposite, what we're really going to focus on today, is too much anxiety, chronic anxiety. So with anxiety, we experience excessive and persistent nervousness. There's a lot of worrying that takes place, repetitive thoughts. There could be fear involved in this. Irritability, when our nervous system is on edge, we are more irritable and not as tolerant to things that we might be more tolerant to when we're not anxious. Sleep disturbances, why is your body going to want to let you sleep if there's a danger out there? Apprehension. This is associated with many different physical symptoms, right? So what happens in the brain then gets transferred into bodily reactions, and we'll discuss what this is in a moment, but it's an activation of the fight or flight response. We sweat more, there might be heart palpitations, chest pain, we might get fatigued really easily, experience headaches, shortness of breath where we're not kind of breathing, and our breathing is a function of the nervous system. So when we get anxious, when we get into the fight or flight mode, our breathing gets a lot shallower. And muscle tension, right? Some causes of anxiety, I mean, there's lots of causes out there. Psychological is definitely a big part of it, right? The way we perceive certain things. One thing to one person might cause anxiety. The same thing to another person might not cause anxiety. You see a crocodile, you might freak out and get really anxious. But if you're, the crocodile hunter or someone who works with them a lot, you're going to see the crocodile. It's not going to trigger you in any way. Various medical conditions can cause anxiety. Medications can definitely do that. Alcohol and other psychiatric disorders. So this is the short list, but we know lots of different things can cause anxiety. So just a reminder that we've got the mental, emotional, spiritual side of things. We've got the biochemical, and they're bidirectional on the two pillars of mental health. Now let's look at what actually happens in the nervous system when we get anxious. We have a stimulus coming into the nervous system, whatever that might be. It could be, a bill that shows up on your desk. It could be an upsetting video that you scrolled to on Instagram. It could be someone yelling at you. It could be almost, getting cut off in traffic. This stimulates the nervous system. And let's just talk about the fight or flight response first. If that stimulus is threatening, we go into fight, flight, and fright mode. And this is a function of the sympathetic nervous system. This is a system that's been in place for thousands and thousands of years. We've been on this planet for 2.6 million years, and this system is what has kept us alive. When we saw a saber-toothed tiger out in the forest or in the savannah, we need to either kill it or get away as fast as possible. And the sympathetic nervous system is in charge of that process. It increases heart rate, it increases blood flow to the brain so we can think quicker. This is all done through adrenal activation. We release stress hormones like cortisol, which is a potent anti-inflammatory in case we get cut or injured. It increases adrenaline, epinephrine, and norepinephrine to allow us to react much quicker. Blood flow goes to the extremities so we can run and fight as quick as possible. This is the fight or flight response. And this is perfectly normal if a saber-toothed tiger's after you. It's not so normal if you're sitting in a chair at a desk looking at a little box, right? Getting activated all the time. The flip side is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest, digest, stop, and think system. This is when our blood pressure is normalized, our heart rate is steady, blood flow is more into the internal organs, like digestion, liver, for liver detoxification, all the other 500 jobs it does. Our breathing is much deeper. And this is when restoration happens in the body. I work with a lot of people with autoimmunity. And with autoimmunity, these people need to rest a lot more than the average person. They need to take naps. They need to make sure they're not stressed too much because they need their body to repair themselves. And you can't repair the body if you're always in sympathetic mode. So this is the physiology that's happening. And essentially, as I said before, things are happening too often or not enough. In this case, too often. We're in the fight or flight mode too often. And it's always a balance. We actually want to go back and forth, right? We want to be able to do that. And it's perfectly good if it's a functional process and we're not in the fight or flight mode too often. When we're looking at interventions to address chronic anxiety, we're looking at 4 areas of intervention, and this is what everything's based on in functional nutrition. A foundational diet, functional foods within that diet, lifestyle modification, and various supplements that can be helpful. And these are the areas where we can actually make changes, make recommendations, put together protocols using these different areas of intervention. We're going to touch on all of these. So first things first, we really need to make sure that this individual who might be over anxious has a diet that supports a healthy nervous system. Without that, they're going to be constantly bombarding themselves with biochemical messages that worsen the way they feel. And an example of that would just be eating sugar all day long or coffee or, stimulants. So just generally speaking, there's lots of diets out there. There's paleo, there's keto, there's omnivore, there's so many to choose from. But the basic goal of all of them is we want a low glycemic index and low diet. Something that doesn't cause these blood sugar spikes. Sometimes people ask me what's the difference between index and load. So this is a good visual to help us understand. So a white potato has a really high glycemic index. It converts into blood sugar very quickly through the digestive tract. Yams, on the other hand, have a lower glycemic index. Now that's kind of part of the story. The other part of the story is glycemic load. And load, as the name suggests, is talking about the amount that you're consuming. So if I consume one little piece of a white potato, it's not going to really affect my blood sugar that much, even though it has a really high glycemic index. On the flip side too, if I have yam, probably won't affect it too much. But if I have a big load of carbohydrate, if I have 4 yams, then I'm going to have a huge blood sugar response, even though the load is even though the index is quite low, the load is very high, and load refers to the quantity. So with carbohydrates, we have to just be careful that we're not consuming too much of them, right? Even if the index is low, we still don't want to overdo it. And relating it back to anxiety, we can have a very similar symptom to anxiety when our blood sugar crashes. And if you look at this chart here, I'll just walk you through it quickly. If you start with something that's high glycemic index, high glycemic load, right? It takes your blood sugar kind of at a higher level, a spike, which is okay. If you're eating a meal, you actually want your blood sugar to go up or else you've got a problem. But we increase our blood sugar. Our pancreas releases insulin. Insulin helps get sugar into the cells, and any extra it stores away in muscle and liver as glycogen. After that process has taken place, our blood sugar will come down. And if we had a really high spike, we overcompensate and we can have a low crash. And when we have a crash, that's a message to your body that danger, 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 we need to get blood sugar back up. Fight or flight mode. We stimulate the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands release hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones can get the blood sugar back up. Think about it. Think if you were in the savannah, you hadn't eaten for 3 days, you're looking for some food, and then there's that saber-toothed tiger. You need quick energy despite the fact you haven't eaten in 3 days. And that's what these hormones do. So they get your blood sugar back up. And or you also reach for another carbohydrate snack to get the blood sugar back up. And people go on this roller coaster all day long. When you're on this roller coaster, you cause what's called reactive hypoglycemia. And it is a strong contributor to chronic anxiety. Often, I've had multiple clients where they experience anxiety, and just by fixing up their diet, we can improve that anxiety by at least 50%. It's a profound effect, and people don't realize how much diet is playing a role in the way they feel in here, in their brain, right? With their cognition, especially with the stimulation of these anxious feelings. Something else that I look at with my clients is their caffeine consumption. So of course, caffeine is a stimulant. It's the most used drug worldwide. And its effects, I'm not going to say in everyone, but in some people, can mimic anxiety. It can stimulate the release of stress hormone like cortisol. And if someone overdoes it and has a sensitive nervous system, they can be anxious from this drug by itself. Now, again, working with, many different people, I've realized that some people not sensitive to coffee at all. It's just not a factor, or caffeine, right? It doesn't really affect them in a negative way. Other people, super duper sensitive to the caffeine. So we have to be really careful, do a proper history and assess if that is. And we could always do an experiment. Hey, I noticed you have, 3 cups of coffee during the day. Let's cut it out completely. See if that helps your anxiety. A lot of what we do in functional nutrition is trying things out. It's a bit experimental. We're making the best educated guess based on their history and their biochemistry. But then we have to try things. We have to do things. We have to have an intervention and see how they do afterwards. Food allergy can play a big role in anxiety. There's a strong association, and I've seen this multiple times. It's something that's a little bit less obvious. It's often missed, definitely missed by, conventional medicine practitioners. Often missed by natural healthcare practitioners. But foods can cause inflammation in the body. They can cause inflammation in the brain if you're sensitive to them. And this can have an anxiety-causing effect. I actually see this in kids a lot of the time. But look at this one case study, an anxiety case study. So there was a 41-year-old woman with a 15-year history of anxiety attacks or panic attacks. She would experience symptoms every 2 to 3 weeks. After the panic attack, she'd be weak and tired for about 1 to 2 days. When she avoided, through an elimination diet, dairy and corn, and this took a little bit of work to figure out what it was, the attacks completely went away. This is what they call a nervous storm due to food allergy. And this has been recorded multiple times. We actually see that food allergies can be found as the cause of nervousness in about 7 out of 8 infants and children. When you figure out what food a kid is sensitive to, it gets really obvious, right? You eliminate it completely and they become a different person. I've seen this in real time. When you reintroduce the food, either by accident or on purpose, the brain just can't operate like it used to, right? And then the system has to come back online. So this is something that's very real and can make a big difference. Imagine a kid who has an allergy to a food, and maybe their blood sugar isn't controlled either, and goes to school every day and can't concentrate in class, can't work properly, and they go to the doctor and the doctor says, you have ADD or ADHD, and then they're given an amphetamine medication to increase blood flow to the frontal cortex and dopamine, when all they need to do is eliminate the food. So now they're hooked on drugs the rest of their life. It's a sad state of affairs, but really just addressing some of the key biochemical factors here can make a huge difference. I went to my wife's side of the family. I went to her family reunion a number of years ago. And one of her cousins was a psychiatrist. And we were just talking with him. He was like kind of conventional medicine oriented, like, traditional psychiatry. And one of the things he said, actually, when we were chatting with him, was that his patients that are depressed and anxious, if they just started to exercise regularly, 85% would be cured. Exercise is a powerful anti-anxiety and antidepressant. Now, like anything that we're talking about, you have to have the right dose. If you're thinking, oh, exercise is good, oh, I'm going to go run a marathon a day, that's probably not a good thing. But low to moderate exercise done 15 to 30 minutes a few times a week has shown to be incredibly effective for decreasing anxiety. In this study specifically, they looked at jogging, swimming, cycling, and walking. And what they found was an increase in body temperature, which makes everything work better. Increase in brain perfusion, that's increased blood flow to the brain, which always improves cognition. And an improved adrenal response. No cost, low cost interventions. Now, I also mentioned earlier that the microbiome can play a huge role in how our cognition works. And this is just one little example, but there's many out there that candida can actually cause anxiety if you have an overgrowth of candida in your gut, and this has been shown in the research. And there's lots of really interesting stuff coming out in the literature as well on how our microbiome, certain bacteria, certain even viruses and parasites can actually affect our cognition. So it's really important also to work on the microbiome. Now, how do we address anxiety? How do we address this chronic activation to the adrenal glands? I'm going to give you quite a long list here. Most of these have been shown, to be powerful interventions. We can't do all of them. We could definitely do some of them. And some are going to resonate with some people and some are going to resonate with other people. So it really depends on who the person is. Now, first, we want to avoid distress and engage in eustress. Easier said than done. Eustress is a good stress, like the stress involved in planning a vacation. With our environment, if we can control something, we want to take action. If we can't control something, we want to change our perception about that. That's just a simplification of how we can avoid distress and engage in eustress. Now, I'll give you an example. Some of you might have heard the term energy vampires. There's that friend, there's that family member. When you hang out with them, you're just exhausted afterwards. And then there's another friend. When you hang out with them, you're energized, you're ready to go afterwards. That would be an example of trying to avoid distress or the friend that is the energy vampire and spending more time with the one that brings you energy, right? So it's about the decisions we make. Changing our perceptions. There's really great ways we can change how the brain works. There's a lot of self-help books out there. I'm a big fan of Wayne Dyer's work, the late Wayne Dyer, Byron Katie's work, which she actually calls the work, helps you to change perceptions about ideas that could be causing stress. Martha Beck is another one of my favorites. I mean, there's a lot of great people out there that have written books and have systems that can help you change your perceptions. Avoid triggers, especially later in the day, like bright lights and loud noise, which cause stimulation. Sleep hygiene is critical. I give a lot of my clients a sleep hygiene handout talking about, not looking at screens in the evening, using blue blocker glasses, getting all electrical devices away from their head, making sure they have a dark room, using a face mask, not exercising too close to bedtime. I mean, these are all just really great ways to get in the mode of sleep, and sleep is the most restorative state we can be in. Avoiding stimulants. Sounds obvious, but a lot of people are consuming things like green tea, coffee later in the day. The half-life of caffeine is 5 hours. So if you have a coffee at, 3 o'clock, still at 8 o'clock, there's half the caffeine in your body. So if you're going to sleep even an hour or two later, that's going to be causing a biochemical stimulation effect. Balance work and play, always, right? We've got to work hard, we've got to play hard. Learn to say no. No might be the most powerful word in your vocabulary for not committing to things you don't want to do. And you have to rest. You just have to rest. There's some great tools that can help to accelerate the activity or help you train yourself into the parasympathetic mode. I'm a big fan of heart rate variability. There's a company called Heart Math that's been doing research on heart rate variability for at least 40 years now. They have a product called Inner Balance that's really helpful for watching your heart rate variability in real time, and I actually recommend my clients get that quite often to help them with that training. So many different types of meditation out there. I've done many myself. I've done Vipassana meditation. I've done Vedic meditation. I've done mindful-based meditation. I've done guided meditations. It's important to find the one that's right for you. And there's a lot of great resources out there that can help you do that. These devices, when used properly, can be super helpful. And there's some really great meditation apps out there that people can try. We want to do the right exercise for us. Exercise for a 20-year-old male might be very different for exercise for a 75-year-old female, right? So we need to do the right exercise for us, and I've had to change even my routine over the years. Deep breathing is a great way to access the nervous system. Our breath is tied to our autonomic nervous system, but we have access to it, which is really cool. So we don't have to think about breathing. We breathe, whether we're thinking about it or not, but we can also bring awareness to it. And that can reverse engineer our effect on the nervous system. And through deep breathing, we can actually affect the whole nervous system. I love music. There's different types of music I love at different times. Gives me different emotional effects. So that could be a really great thing to add. Calm environments are critical for people to have some downtime and decompression time. Nature often offers that environment in a beautiful way. Socializing with the right people, also really important. Now, there was this TED Talk that I listened to a number of years ago by Amy Cuddy, and she was talking about the power pose. And what we've known for years, I remember learning about this in one of my psychology courses in university, that when you smile, even if you're forcing a smile, it actually creates chemicals, the molecules of emotion that I was talking about earlier, Candace Pert was researching, that are beneficial, that create the same biochemistry that if you actually were happy. So you can kind of fake it till you make it in these situations. And she talks about a powerful pose where you stand in a way where you feel really powerful, and that can really help with confidence and actually change certain hormones, which I think is pretty cool. But, if I told you or asked you, what does a depressed person look like? What does an anxious person look like? You could probably really be able to describe them quite accurately. Versus, what does a happy person look like? What does a confident person look like? What does a powerful person look like? Right? So you can actually change your body position to affect how you feel. Remember the bidirectional effect. There's a lot of great nutrients out there that are really helpful for anxiety and neurochemistry. This is definitely a very short list, and we cater to the individual. So we use various biomarkers, a really detailed history. We do like a 2 to 4 hour history with our clients to figure out which nutrients are required in what dosages. These are definitely some of the top nutrients that help with the nervous system. We need B3, B6, B12, and folic acid to make things like serotonin and other neurotransmitters. The B complex is critical for the stress response. Magnesium, sometimes called the anti-stress mineral, Fish oil basically makes up a big portion of our nervous system. A big chunk of our brain is DHA, which comes from fish oil, or we have to synthesize it in the body. So fish oil is amazing for building up a nervous system. Vitamin D is also critical for the nervous system. So we should check blood levels and supplement appropriately. These are some herbs that I use regularly with clients. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a passion flower. There's a picture of one here. It's one of the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen. But passion flower, valerian lemon balm, catnip, lavender hops, they're all nervines that help to kind of take the edge off the nervous system and calm us down a little bit. Valerian is probably the strongest sedative. I wouldn't really recommend typically valerian during the day unless it's in a lower dose, but these herbs can be tremendously helpful in kind of helping people transition into a more parasympathetic mode. So in summary, we have the two pillars of mental health, the mental, emotional, spiritual, the biochemical. We want to work on both pillars all the time because they interact with each other. And we can do that by all the factors that we talked about that are related to a foundational diet. We talked about the low glycemic index, low glycemic load diet, whatever one you choose. Functional foods that can be really helpful, foods that are like high in B vitamins that help to balance blood sugar, that have nutrients that are important for the brain, like fish. Lifestyle, there are a lot of great lifestyle recommendations, trying to decompress more, trying to change our perceptions, do a lot of work there. And supplements, which, as the name suggests, they supplement the other three things on this pie, but they can help accelerate the process. I hope you learned a lot and you'll apply some of this, because knowledge is not power until it's applied. I really hope that you take what you've learned today and put it into practice right away for you or your clients. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time and energy, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Take care and have a great rest of your day.